Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Big Data plus Small Data equals Reduced Risk. My name is Chelsea and I will be your MC for our webinar today. I'd also like to introduce our panelist, Mike Miller, the CFO of ClearPoint Claims, who provides insight and guidance on business and IT linkage in the insurance sector. Having been a consultant for 23 years, he's highly respected for his strategic thinking and advisory skills. And Sarah Kelly, CEO of SPLICE Software, a company whose technology enhances business' operations, service, and the customer experience. Tara has a passion for enabling clients to similarly engage in meaningful, data-driven dialogues with their customers. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items to walk through. Our webinar today will run about 50 minutes, with 5 to 10 minutes for questions at the end. All questions will be facilitated through the chat window that should appear on the right side of your screen. You may submit questions or comments at any time during the presentation. However, all questions will be addressed at the allotted time for Q&A at the end. At this time, you have the option to view the presentation in full screen. You can do so by clicking the 2 arrows in the top right corner. During today's presentation, we're going to be talking about how big data and small data can both be used differently as a part of your communication strategy. We're also going to be talking about how insurers can leverage data to help drive revenue, reduce costs, and ultimately reduce the risk of unhappy policyholders by growing customer loyalty. So let's go ahead and get started.
Good morning, everybody. This is Mike Miller. I think it's morning in some time zones and afternoon in others, but good day as well. ClearPoint Claims has a rich history and heritage in adjusting property and casualty claims throughout the United States. And we deal with insurance carriers of all sizes. And traditionally, the improvement in customer service was very claim-centric that suggested that if we get claims closed faster, customers will be more happy, which is essentially true. But as you have these conversations with carriers of all sizes, the question becomes, what else can we do? And to that end, ClearPoint Claims has invested heavily in strategic relationships, and certainly our relationship with SPLICE, as we will discuss in great detail today, gives us another avenue to improve customer satisfaction. And whether it's claim-related or not, technology like SPLICE gives us a chance to help carriers do that. The emphasis on customer satisfaction is not going away. It is clearly the talk of boardrooms and senior leadership who know the value or have read about the value of increasing customer satisfaction, whether it be Net Promoter Score or some other customer metric. And it's not going to go away. And boards of directors and senior leadership, the reason they say, or the reason they're focused on improving customer satisfaction is because they can. And it's clearly one of the #1 issues facing carriers of all sizes. Use of technology to improve customer satisfaction with products and services like SPLICE gives carriers of all sizes the ability to do so. And the customer expectation at all levels has changed fairly dramatically, which we'll talk about. Next slide, Chelsea. What's the risk? Well, the risk is increased churn. If you talk to the marketing groups within carriers, they will tell you that the cost to obtain a new customer is significantly higher than the cost of retaining a customer. Wasted time. The risk of wasted time in a claims process if the data is stagnant or stale is certainly significant. And with wasted time, there's implied increased costs. Next slide, Chelsea. How good does the data need to be? Well, historically, there's been not a lot of attention paid to keeping the data robust and up to date. And more importantly, the data and within many customers and within many insurers, we're starting to develop an analytical culture. And how can that data within the policy or within the insured's data records enhance or encourage that analytical culture that many insureds, or excuse me, many carriers are embracing and embarking upon. Next slide, Chelsea. We've had several tropical storms, and Danny, Erica, Fred, Ida, and thankfully none of these storms caused much of a significance relative to claims for insurers. But from a customer experience perspective, what did you as a carrier do to prepare your insurers for this event? Did you reach out? Did you talk to them? How did you help prepare them in the event that there might have been a claim? And the reality of it is, if the data is stagnant and incorrect, how does that affect the cost of processing claims? And more importantly, how many wrong assignments have we had or sent an adjuster to a wrong address? Next slide, Chelsea. We clearly understand that most claims executives and most senior leadership executives within insurance carriers are really caught between a rock and a hard place. And there's two competing vectors. The first vector on the right-hand side is the push and the initiatives to improve Net Promoter Score. And on the other side is a constant battle and a constant dilemma of not having the right resources to do that. And typically it's improve the customer experience, but you have to do it with less budget. Next slide, Chelsea. Borrowing a slide from an AT&T advertisement, the customer experience is changing at a very, very rapid rate. And while these are small children sitting around talking about technology and talking about choices, these are the customers of the future. And the customer experience and the expectation of that customer experience is changing so rapidly with the technology tools that have already evolved, smartphones, tablets, etc. But this is not going to go away. In fact, the rate at which the customer experience needs to change is at a phenomenal rate. Next slide, Chelsea. And how can insurers of all sizes influence that customer experience, particularly in a non-claims environment? And if you can imagine for just a moment a human voice that is reaching out in a pre-catastrophe situation, advising the insureds that an event is about to occur, to take precautions, follow civil defense orders and civil defense evacuations, and that you, the carrier, are there to help them once this event has passed. In a similar vein, in a post-cat situation, reaching back out with a human voice, talking to the insureds about where the catastrophe mobile centers might be. If they have a claim, what are the 800 numbers to dial? And facilitating and reaching out to those customers with a human voice, and which Tara will talk about in a little bit. More importantly, providing updates to the claims process, reaching out with a human voice in both a CAT and a non-CAT situation, providing valuable information to know that the claim is being processed and that their claim is very, very important to the carrier. Additionally, having that same human voice reaching out and verifying underwriting data, providing lapse notifications, reaching out and touching those customers frequently and with very important information continues to improve the customer experience. Next slide, Chelsea. One of the questions is, how can I affect customer satisfaction? Well, it really starts with clean data, which we'll talk about in a minute. But clean data, non-stagnant data, data that is rich in elements, can really drive strategic initiatives to improving that customer experience. Moving the needle on customer satisfaction, improving Net Promoter Score, is the talk of the town. It's the talk of most insurance carriers. Next slide, Chelsea. There are some very, very simple things that, when improper or stagnant, can really affect the customer experience. And many of us, as we've talked to carriers of all sizes, are very interested in SPLICE-like opportunities and capabilities, but they all have the same look, meaning that, for example, a billing address listed as the property address can significantly delay the claims process and the claims dispatch. Those carriers, for example, that deal with rural properties, if you look in the databases of rural insureds, many of those addresses are directional in nature, like the third farm from the stop sign, delays in the claims and dispatch and claim settlement process. With mortgagees changing at a very rapid rate, can certainly affect a delay in the claim settlement process. And there are very, very simple things that, when corrected, can provide a base and a foundation to improving that customer experience. Next slide, Chelsea. And with that, Tara Kelly.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mike. At SPLICE Software, we really are all about proactive customer engagement, and we specialize in voice. And we're staring at a screen here of data, and I think that it makes a ton of sense, because there's no way you can have a high value, high quality voice interaction if you don't have the data right. And it's interesting because it's not enough just to have big data. It's not enough just to know that you might be in an area where a hurricane is coming. It's also important that I know which phone number to reach you on, and what your preference is. Is it a call? Is it an SMS? What is that message? When and how many times should I call you? So data is really the very beginning, and we obsess about it here. And we'll talk more about it with some of the partnerships and opportunities to work with you together to create that ultimate pyramid. And so, well, it's things like the demographic and geographic and attitudinal data, it's transaction data, policy, claims, administration out of those core systems. It moves up and it moves beyond that to loyalty and profile data and preferences. And ultimately, you want to end at that holy grail where you're understanding the needs and desires. And when you're operating even some of the time at that level, you really have the opportunity to move that customer service index. It really needs to have this whole pyramid. Next slide, please. So the last, of course, is the second thing. We have all this great insight on data knowledge, but it's what we do to bring the power to the voice. So I've got a funny little clip here, and some of you might remember it, but voice communication has always been a huge part of the human being. So take a little listen at the difference of the ways we can interact with a highly knowledgeable database.
Perhaps the professor could use your computer. Perhaps the professor could use your computer. Please. Computer? 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 Computer?
So I love this part. Oh, no, I'll just talk to the phone.
Hello, computer. Just use the keyboard. The keyboard. Oh, great.
So the interesting thing is, if you have a power user, if your policyholder is a power user, of course, there's a lot of ways they can interact with your system. But the truth is, human beings' first and foremost preference is going to be, let's have a dialogue. And so maybe we're not looking for transparent aluminum, right? But I think the story still really holds. And I think that you're going to see this continuing as a trend. We've lived a long time with some awkward sounding automation, and technology is really changing and evolving in this area. Next slide, please. If you look at some Forrester Research recently, and they talk about where are those customers really satisfied, percentage of U.S. online adults who have adopted or reported satisfaction in the following channels, because customer service happens on all channels. And the comparison here is 2012 to 2014. And what we really want to look at is the areas that are just surging ahead. And then interesting is some of the areas that are really not effective channels for that customer experience. And I'm going to pick at the bottom for a second. Contacting a company by using Twitter, it's actually decreasing satisfaction. That's not the place we want to be. This channel's getting very noisy and less personalized. Is it an important part of your strategy? Of course it is. Your customers, their policyholders are there. Voice self-service, this is that inbound experience. It's kind of remain unchanged. You know, it's time to start addressing these things. But in the top quadrant here, conversations with customers and agents on the phone, this is actually increasing in satisfaction. How can we have the dialogues at the right time? How can we make sure when they reach out we're there? Response on email, another one to see some really great areas of improvement. And we'll go to the next slide here and we'll talk about the trending. Some of you are probably very familiar with these quadrants that and trend lines that Forrester does. I'll try to sort of walk through the baseline. The blue is significant success, and significant success is the kind of success that is going to move that customer experience index, 2+ points. This is a big deal. Moderate success, it's an improvement, and minimal success is almost hard to measure, so that's red. Gray is moderate, and again, blue is significant. And we're looking at technologies as part of a customer experience in the ecosystem. When are they at creation, survival, trying to prove their concept, or growth, and when are they really hitting that phase? So the legend on the buttons that look kind of like radio buttons, our video buttons, are going to tell us the years. And if you look at things like proactive outbound, this is rated as significant success. This is going to be making a massive difference in the next 5 to 10 years. That's where the peak is coming. So you're just starting to move into that peak. And the question really is, are you going to join this evolution of where the customer experience goes? Case management, they think that's probably over 10 years out before that is the kind of experience you're looking to see. Workforce management, email response management. That one, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. A lot of customers are still interacting directly with agents, directly with brokers, directly, and it's not always tracked, and it's still got a lot more manual process and trust in systems than we might want. But the exciting thing is voice is really peaking, and those proactive communications, and it's such a very natural human thing that you just want to include it in your strategy. So we can provide this deck out to anyone who's interested. Some really great research here on where we're seeing that customer experience going. Next slide, please. At SPLICE, we really track that experience and that level of engagement, and something that we always focus on very heavily is what we call a listenership graph. And so what you're looking at here is across the bottom and the horizontal is the number of seconds that were being listened, and up top on the vertical axis is the number of people listening at that second. And so it's very common that you may have some of the initial hang up. This could be, I don't have the right language, I'm going to transfer to the call center. But the exciting thing is when we look at the number of individuals, the greatest number listening all the way to the end of that message. And it gives you this very real-time feedback. It's not just a wonderful experience as far as having the right data, having emotion, tone, dialect, language, accuracy. We're also able to map, was this message meaningful to the customer? So similar to how you might map heat mapping on your website for usefulness of an online site or click-throughs on an email, tons of value here for you to iteratively move forward. And really, phone numbers remain one of the least areas where there's any atrophy. So if you can get 80% of your customers hearing that primary message, what would that be worth? What would that do to that customer service needle? It's a pretty big impact. Next slide, please. But the question is, to Mike's point earlier and to so many organizations we've talked to is, I don't know if my data is ready. You're talking to me about the tracking of data elements and audio based on it. How do I know I've even got the right stuff? And it's a good question. It's a great question. And I wanted to just sort of do a very high-level walkthrough of how very doable this is. So at the top left-hand corner, we're looking at a policy admin or CRM system, and you're not going to actually build hard into this system. You're going to pull out a report. This is a report that you might actually be already extracting today to send to an R.R. Donnelly for a mailing or whatever it is, but you're going to pull it out, and it might be something as simple as, you know, the unique ID for that customer, full name, primary address, secondary address, primary and secondary phone. It can be that simple, and you're going to move that out through an API into a cloud-based system that can map that for you. And so you're not talking about a tremendous amount of PII, personally identifiable information. You're not talking about a huge security risk within access. There's a lot of ways to very safely analyze where your data is at and bring it up a level. Now, below policy, admin, and CRM is this third-party data. And when we say third-party data, it can be a couple different things. This may be an Axiom that's providing updates on, is this primary or secondary? It may be populating the accuracy of those phone numbers. But it also might be a weather forecasting system. And so there can be multiple third-party data systems that we would use that would all come together and map so that we can make a best case recommendation. And then there's providers that are hosted, and so of course they're in a cloud, but data hosting and management and the analysis. And then it goes out to a provider network, and ultimately that intelligent message that has feeling and emotion and tone reaches a policyholder. And so there's several opportunities here to take subsets or segments of your data or the whole database and repopulate that information. We can safely give it back to you, and you determine how you want to append those records. So there really is a very doable path with a lot of security and safety nets in place so that you can have that accurate, timely conversation with that policyholder. Next slide, please. So there's simple ways to get started. Once you've got that data figured out, you've got this guy, you know, what do I want to do that's going to move the needle? And we're going to talk a lot about post-CAD and pre-CAD and claim status updates. But so of course you've got pre and post claims. There's appointment reminders for the adjusters. You look at the cost of sending an adjuster to the wrong place. That's one thing. What if we send them to the right place, but you're not there? It ends up in the same thing. It's not a successful claim experience, and it delays things, and it's very costly. So these are things that can really be quite easily fixed and addressed. Claim status updates. Your customer wants to know what's going on, and at a time where you are absolutely slammed, if there's been a large event, you're very busy, letting them know in advance that you care and that you're on it just says everything. Anyone that's been part of any catastrophic event planning knows sometimes the most important thing is just an update, even if it's not a huge step forward in the process. It's just an update that, hey, we didn't forget about you. Late premium reminders, it sounds so simple. There's a lot of great carriers and policyholders that would use that mobile system if they knew it existed. They didn't mean not to update their payment information. They just didn't remember because they took out their policy 10 years ago. So late premium reminders can make a big dent. And of course, net promoter surveys, really making sure that we're tracking it in a meaningful way, maybe looking at it and saying, do we want to move past customer satisfaction into a system that is easier for tracking than NPS system. Next slide, please. So you can bring your data back to life, and I hope that that has appeared as this might be doable. And the great news is you can take that subset of data, and you can find actionable insights. You can update those phone numbers. You can recognize that this is actually a secondary address, or that the billing address doesn't actually match, and we shouldn't have pushed it through. And we can personalize it. You can look back to that data pyramid and move towards needs and desires. And localization is critical. We want the caller ID on there. We want your brand promise to be kept in that experience with the customer. And that's why you need small data. And that's why you want to use that big data, that third-party data, to create that relationship. You can bring your data back to life. It's not a total overhaul. It doesn't have to be a heart transplant. It just might be a little electroshock therapy, but hopefully not as painful. So hopefully that's a well-intended joke for you. All right, next slide, please, Chelsea. Really coming back to the customer here, it's a crazy graphic image. If you look at this picture, how many claims are present in this flood situation. It's pretty daunting. We've got commercial, auto, home, everything happening right here. And in this moment, these people need to know more than ever that you are there for them. And you need to be ready with, going back to that Forrester slide, multiple phases of communication. But I'll tell you, in these dramatic times, people are answering their phones, they're hearing it, they're listening, they're checking, because they're uber connected, because they're trying to make their lives work. And that mobile device in their hand is such a great way to reach them. And having your text buried down deep is not quite the same as saying, oh my gosh, you know what, they called me, here's their number on caller ID. So it's an amazing chance to really be part of it and let them know you're there for them when it counts. Next slide. If you go back to being there for them, it means that you can deliver on the promise and keep the service. And it's more than some people might think. When we look at things like, what if that adjuster is going to the wrong place? What if we're using our system and it's no longer accurate? What would happen if we could have done an appointment reminder or verified where that adjuster was going? You look at an example like Arthur, it was rated only a category 2, and it was considered a light impact. So you're like, oh, it's light impact, how bad could this be? Well, there was 44,000 people that saw property damage. And over around 30% of those actually went with wrong assignments. Either they were not there, they weren't reminded of it, or they went to the wrong place. That's 13,200 adjusters that wasted a tremendous amount of time. It's not just about their time that got wasted, it's the cost to the experience, and it's the financial cost. Wrong assignments aren't free. They average about $113 if you look at coast to coast and go off of an average. This would be an instance with a light impact where we would have over $1 million of just loss. This wasn't loss that made a customer happy and an experience good because they got their home back. This is just lost revenue. So these numbers are really real. And if we go back to the idea that we're really tasked with two things, move the customer experience needle and, God darn it, save me some money, there might be some opportunity to address both, and I think we can see that. So some great data here. It's courtesy of Property and Casualty 360 if you want to take a greater look at it, or better yet, run the math in your own organization and take a look at what it might have cost you. I think they can be surprising sometimes how big these numbers get. Next slide, please. At the end of the day, your policyholders put their full trust in your hands, and you need to hold that trust safe. And we strongly advise towards a Net Promoter Survey, that customer satisfaction tracking at that really deep level. What is happening? Are we there for you? Are we moving the needle? We said it counts. We've got to measure the things that matter, and there certainly are ways to do it. And congratulations for the people that are doing it right now. I don't know if it's ever enough. I don't know if we ever arrive at a place where we say our customer service is good enough. We're not working on it anymore. I just don't know if that's where any of us really live. Next slide. We do have another webinar coming up here, shameless plug, 5 ways clean data pays for itself. We kind of touched on one there, but we didn't really get into the ROI side. We just looked at the scary side of the cost. But if you were to implement some of these solutions, clean up that data a little bit, make it usable, employ some of these proactive communications like Forrester is recommending, I think you're going to see that it really will pay for itself. So watch for notifications on that. That webinar is coming up soon. Next slide.
So thank you, Tara. We'd like to open up discussion for questions now. So if you're in full screen, please press escape and you'll be able to access the chat window. You'll be able to type your questions in the comment box and address them to one of the panelists, either Tara or Mike, and we'll pause for a minute to wait for those to come in.
Perfect. And Chelsea,
Okay, so we have a couple of questions here. The first one will be, keeping today's data landscape in mind, what is the estimated time to clean up my data?
Ooh, that's a good one. You want to go for it, Mike, or what do you think? You want me to take a stab at it?
Well, obviously it depends on the size of the carrier, but perhaps, you know, taking a little different route to the answer here of saying perhaps a pilot program and a random sample of customer records to verify or develop some statistics about inaccurate data would be a better place to start than try to put, trying to swallow the elephant here and say to the carrier. I think it's a matter of testing it. It's a matter of random samples. And once you have that random sample, I think it gets a little easier to quantify the time, the effort, and perhaps the expense to really improve the data. But it's really got to start with a pilot project. Sarah?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you, Mike, on the pilot project. You want to get a subset of your data. I think the trick is always picking something that's big enough that it's statistically significant, that it's worth putting a team together. One of the really important questions you want to answer is, do you want to measure the business result of what cleaner data can do first, then decide what exercise you would like to go through and mapping it back to your core system. So if you kind of can visualize the diagram we looked at, there's an opportunity to have accurate, actionable insights and conversations without having the cost internally of mapping that accurate data back into your system. And I think that you want to make that long-term strategy, and that part can be time-consuming as you look at how your systems flow and pass through data. But as far as just getting an assessment of where am I at, and if I were to, be at a better place with this, how impactful could this be? I think that's a really great challenge to raise your hand to, and you could really merge and come back with that assessment within, 3 weeks. Once you have architecture for the data structuring and the process, you can almost run this thing real time where you're cleaning as you go. There's some really great services available, and that works. But step one is really that subset and getting a sense. And I think the number you want to know is, does it have a customer impact that's really positive, and what is the financial possible reward or impact? And at that point, then you can start to plan out within your own system. But you can get that kind of insight within a few weeks.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah and Mike. So the second question is, in your experience, how long does it take to grow your Net Promoter Score after implementing customer experience initiatives like CAT notifications?
All right, Mike, rocks, paper, scissors. You go.
Realistically, you can over-survey Net Promoter Score. You can do too many surveys. And realistically, it's kind of a longer-term view that suggests that you'll see improvements in probably a 6-month to 12-month window. They're not immediate, and I'm not suggesting that they would be immediate, but with an initiative to improve the data and using products and technologies like SPLICE, it will be a 6-month to 12-month journey to really see some improvements and meaningful improvements in NPS.
Yeah. I think one of the key words, Mike, that you said there really is that word meaningful. Sometimes you can get that initial response, and instead of actually testing, I'm going to pick on a carrier I'm thinking of right now in a really, really nice quality survey that happens immediately after, and that can be useful. But what's more important is that longer-term follow-up, because if you want to get their assessment of just one part of your experience, like, hey, how was entering this form? Okay, that's really good feedback, but that is not that overall customer experience index. That's feedback on the form. And if you want to really get it, yeah, it's that word you're using, meaningful. You want the meaningful indicator, you're 6, 12 months out. Testing products and ensuring that is holding up is really important, but a true Net Promoter system has got to be based on testing at various levels. And when you want to get down to the end of it, you really want to be able to see overall, would you refer me to others? Not would you say, hey, they have a kick butt form, but by the way, the rest was crap or whatever it is. You need that longer term view.
Great insight. So our third question then is, how does big data aid in reducing customer churn, and how is it measured?
I can go first on this one, maybe. I think I'm going to pick on, weather systems for a second, and understanding likelihood of an event within an area, within a geographic region. And in those situations, it's the ability to be out there with the message as early as possible. It's not after it's been all over the radio alerts everywhere and it's been on for 4 hours. You finally figure it out, because that's called small data when you get that email notification as well, or alert. Big data is when we infer things. It's when we process. It's when we analyze and say the likelihood of this based on the science, right? And I think that is when you're really coming to a place where your customers say, wow, you're investing in me. You know, you're doing all this work just so my life can be a little bit easier, better, and make sense. And so when you've done the work, make sure that you make it actionable, because if you quietly do the work and you just say, look we better get a bunch of more, you know, adjusters because we're thinking there's an event coming, let's have them on standby, it's kind of not as nice as if you were to reach out to the customer in that process too. So I think big data can have a really big impact in that experience. Mike, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to add, which is there is someone within the carrier, whether it's the chief marketing officer, chief customer officer, that's got to stand in front of senior leadership and say, our churn has been reduced by X. And if it's reducing by X, everybody's happy. If it's increasing, nobody's happy. Because again, the cost of obtaining new customers is exponential compared to the cost of keeping a customer. So that chief marketing officer, chief customer officer is ingrained to look at the churn percentages, and hopefully the churn is reducing. And if it's reducing, then everybody's doing their job relative to improving the customer experience.
Yeah, well said.
Great responses. So this one is directed, I believe, at Tara. So does SPLICE offer solutions to help gather our new client data?
New client data. That's a great question. I'm hoping I'm understanding it correctly. Yes, in that through the brokers, through the policy admin systems. And so when you are onboarding a new customer, or when they're anywhere within their journey in their experience with your brand, whether it's making a payment or making a claim, of course, is obviously a very high touch time. But when they're brand new and they're filling out that policy, this is the right time to ask them, you know, can we reach you with this automated message? Are you interested in, you know, learning more about some of the other products we provide? Do you prefer an SMS and then a voice call prior on these type of events? And it's a really great opportunity to capture that profile information. And if you can think back to that, you know, pyramid we looked at of data, that puts you right at the place where you're about to get into desires and needs. And so absolutely, SPLICE can empower that. We've got a series of APIs. So whether it's a social API, an SMS API, a call API, that's the place where we want to start gathering that information and just really giving ourselves permission to have an awesome customer experience.
Great. Thank you so much, Tara.
No problem.
The next question we have is, how can I calculate the return on investment specific to my organization?
Rock, paper, scissors?
Again, going back to the chief marketing officer, the chief customer officer, and calculating, you know, the improvement in retention is clearly one of the biggest factors in computing the ROI. Having good data and doing something about it is critical. But again, the proof is, are these customers staying because we're doing a better job at not only communicating, but serving their needs? And the chief marketing officer, the chief customer officer can provide that detail and help you compute the ROI based on what's being spent to clean up the data.
Yeah, I think having a strong baseline is a big part of it as well, right? Understanding the whole encumbered cost of an existing process, just as far as you can, and then looking at what this new process around customer outreach could do. And so if you looked at something as simple as You know, what if it reduced? And these numbers aren't just crazy; they're actually common in a claim situation. By, you know, getting out to the customer first with proactive notifications. If you're reducing 30 to 40% inbound call volume, I think you could probably do the math on that fairly fast. You'll have a knowledge within your organization of what it is per minute per agent, and you're going to be able to extrapolate that to an ROI quite easily. So depending on the use case you're looking at, but really it starts with just getting a sense of your baseline and what that nets out to be, and then looking at what this new change or adjustment or addition to your workflow would end up with the result.
Great. Thank you so much for the recommendations. And the last question today is, how do you recommend I pitch this concept optimally in order to gain executive buy-in?
Again, the sample of data, the random sample, the subset that Tara talked about, will prove the case in itself. If you're finding a great deal of errors or stagnant or outdated information, applying what you're finding in that random sample to the total population will raise everybody's attention to the quality of the data that resides today.
Yep, I think that's a really great point. Sometimes even creating baselines actually starts to build the case. So everybody has, you know, the list of 20 things you need to get done, and you got time for 3 in a day, and you try to do 5, and it's tight. But I think customer experience is always on that list. It's everybody's number 1 or number 2, and it's just very real. So having an understanding of what are the costs that you're incurring to support that level of service, and what are the areas you can change within reach. And so, you know, swapping it out, changing entire, you know, systems, your policy admin, or you're, you know, only using big data analytics on this whole thing. Some of these aren't possible without a much longer plan in place, and they're a larger project. And the nice opportunity is this is really about augmenting your existing processes with a higher level of customer touch. And so when you go to sell it internally, I think there's a huge benefit of talking about the reduced risk of the ability to try and measure in a very safe but yet significant way. And so I think that when you're selling it internally, having a commitment to knowing your baselines is very helpful. And then the ability that, hey, this is highly measurable. You know, we don't have to necessarily wait 3 years till it's implemented to know where we're at. And so I think that can make a really big difference.
Awesome. So it looks like that's all the time and all the questions that we have for our webinar today. So please take a look out in your inbox for a follow-up email that will alert you with any material you missed or that you can share with your colleagues. On behalf of myself, ClearPoint Claims, and SPLICE Software, we'd like to thank you for joining us, and take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.